Alrighty. Good evening, everyone. We're just waiting for a couple of more folks to hop on. So we'll give them a couple more minutes. Paisha's there. Back to my Zoom window. All right. Welcome in, everyone. We are here for our July 2006 Equity Advisory Group meeting. Few seconds. Here we go. And letting a couple more folks in. Excellent. Today, our topic is the integrated system planning for deepest need customers. And we've got a really exciting group of presenters for you today. We are going to start with some introductions. Hello, everyone. My name is Arian Ford. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the facilitator for the Equity Advisory Group. And to start us off, I'm going to pass it off to Yvonne, who's going to do our safety moment.
Great. Thanks, Ariam. Welcome, everyone. Well, I know this is wildfire season. I know it's really warm this week as well. You know, we were just chatting just before this meeting how the wildfire smoke is approaching Skagit area. So just be careful out there. I know as of today, we've got, looks like 36 active wildfires here in the state of Washington. So I want to take the time to review some steps that we can take to prepare for wildfire season. This information that you see here is directly taken from our PSE website there. And, you know, a couple of tips here. So create and practice a household emergency plan and build an emergency kit. There's some great resources there and the links provided. If you're a PSE customer, make sure that your PSE account contact information is up to date as well in case there are outages that we'll be able to notify you. If you use a medical device in your home that relies on electricity, apply for a life support status on your account as well. Those with life support status receive advance notice for scheduled outages whenever that's possible. And then also sign up for county emergency alerts too, and also learn about neighborhood or community emergency response plans in your area. It's also important to maintain trees and other vegetation on your property and report dangerous trees near power lines. And then also a couple of resources too. The Washington Department of Natural Resources has a good wildfire ready plan on their website on actions you can take in your home and community. And then also the American Red Cross too has resources for emergency preparedness. I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much. And to jump right into our conversation, I'm going to welcome Rachel Gates, an Equity Advisory Group member, to give us our equity movement.
Hello. Can you move on to the next slide, please? Yeah, so today's equity focus is procedural I'm going to be talking about the Jemez democratic organizing principles. I will put well, where'd the link go? I was going to put a link in the chat to the whole principles if you want to read along, because this is just the overarching ones. So these were created in 1996 as part of a group of 40 people of color and European American representatives. This is, again, I'm reading from the handout, so apologies for the awkward phrasing. And they met in Jemez, New Mexico, and hosted by the Southwest Network for Environmental and Economic Justice to kind of think about how to go about organizing in a democratic, like inclusive way, which leads to the first principle, which is to be inclusive. So it's if we hope to achieve just societies that include all people in decision making and ensure that all people have an equitable share of the wealth and the work of this world, then we must work to build that kind of inclusiveness into our own movement in order to develop alternative policies and institutions to the treaty's policies under neoliberalism. So sorry, it's a little bit dense. I'm not necessarily going to read all of the whole ones, but just so you get the flavor of it. This requires more than tokenism. It cannot be achieved without diversity at the planning table, in staffing, and in coordination. It may delay achievement of other important goals. It will require discussion, hard work, patience, and advanced planning. It may involve conflict, but through this conflict, we can learn better ways of working together. It's about building alternative institutions, movement building, and not compromising out in order to be accepted into the anti-globalization club. I'm just going to read the names of the rest of them, but again, if you're interested, these are called the Jemez Principles for Democratic Organizing. I came across them, I believe, in one of my classes at some point in my academic journey. The next principle is emphasis on bottom-up organizing. The third is let people speak for themselves. The fourth is work together in solidarity and mutuality. The fifth is build just relationships among ourselves. And the last is commitment to self-transformation. And I'll read that one as well to close it out. As we change societies, we must change from operating on the mode of individualism to community-centeredness. We must walk our talk. We must be the values that we say we're struggling for, and we must be justice, be peace, and be community. I think for me, these principles really resonate with what the EAG is trying to accomplish in bringing together perspectives from all different parts of PSE service territory and bringing our, our individual viewpoints as well, and just trying to come up with suggestions and solutions so that Puget Sound Energy can work towards a just transition in accordance with the Clean Energy Transition Act. So if does anyone have any questions about these, or has anyone come across them before or used them before in your work? If not,
Awesome
that's
hurts
okay.
from Piyush. So definitely support.
Okay, well, I guess that's it. Again, I put the link in the chat, or you can just look up Hema's Principles for Democratic Organizing if you are watching on YouTube or the webinar format. Highly encourage reading the entire document.
Monica says that she's heard of them, but or hasn't. She feels like she's heard of them, but maybe not specifically. But really appreciate the presentation. I think, as you said, an excellent reflection of kind of how you might show up in these spaces, how you're bringing the voices of your community into these spaces, and what some of the values that are formulated in that bottom up space. Right? Like,
Yeah.
excellent.
I guess, yeah, I'm glad I could bring these to you, Neith, and others. And I will pass it back over to the facilitators.
Thank you. So we've got a pretty full agenda today, but wanting to make sure that we're going to hit all of our times and get you out of here on time. And so we've done our welcome and safety moment and our equity moment. In a couple of seconds, we're going to have another clean energy compliance report, or kind of one of those news flashes that we started last month. And then we have our presentation portion where we've got our speakers who are going to talk to us about integrated system planning for deepest need customers. And that's going to go from 5:35 to 6:05. We'll have a break, a 10-minute break. And we're going to do another facilitated discussion that is, again, pretty extensive, using the Mentimeter tool again, but a couple of changes this time. We're only going to be on one slide, so hopefully that will help with answering your questions and keeping up with the number of questions or where your responses are going. And then we are going to start after break. We're going to put the link in the chat, and you will have 3 minutes to focus on putting and writing your answers before we actually start the conversation. So hopefully that allows people to focus on the written words, and then kind of bringing up their points and explaining to us in this conversation. So that's how facilitated discussion will go. And then we welcome folks on the YouTube and viewers to join us for public comment at 6:50. Before we kick off, again, just kind of some of our house rules. We are here to listen and appreciate the diversity of views and opinions. We asking participants, particularly EAG members, to actively participate, to behave constructively and courteously towards all participants, and to respect the role of the facilitator to guide the group process. Observers, both here and online, we're looking for the respect of the equity advisory group's time and the discussion of their topics, and the ability for the group to really be in discussion and conversation with each other. And so we're asking you folks out there in YouTube, in the chat, we have Julia, our colleague, who is monitoring the YouTube chat. If you'd like to tell us where you're coming from, and what kind of perspective you're bringing today, that would be awesome. You're also going to be posing some questions in the chat a little bit later. Public comment's going to be at 6:50. We will put up the instructions to join public comment during the break. We have it set up so that the first 5 individuals signed on will each have 2 minutes to speak. And then if you are watching through the live stream on YouTube, we do have a facilitator monitoring the YouTube. Her name is Julia. You can use the chat to ask questions or comments, and then we do capture those comments and bring them into our meeting summary, which is posted on the EAG website. So this is actually, we change it everywhere else, but here, to give us our PSE Energy Equity News Brief, I'm actually going to turn it over to Brian.
That's right. All right. Can everyone hear me? All right. Good to see you all this evening. You're probably going to see and hear a lot of me tonight. But we're going to start off tonight just talking a bit about the first clean energy compliance report. So first, a kudos and hats off to this group, this body here, because when we first started on this CETA journey, you all were very foundational in putting this report, putting the beginnings of this report together, and to what you'll see described later on here. And if you'd like also to read later on in the report as well. So really can't tell you enough of how instrumental this group has played in putting this, implementing everything throughout this period. So we filed our first report back in July 1, so almost 3 weeks ago, really showing our transition from 2022 through 2025. That was the period that we were reporting on. Again, I mentioned EAG was heavily involved in implementation, and really want to talk here today about that clean energy transition overall. So I'm going to highlight a few areas. If you look at the report itself, I really encourage you to read the whole thing. It's a long report, but it's a really good one. But especially look at your executive summary, and there's specific sections related to equity in that report. So thinking about the outreach and engagement, thinking about equitable distribution of benefits. There's some key sections in the report. I know M sent some material for today's meeting, and you get to check that out. And I think it kind of directs you and hits the highlights on what to focus on there. Now, I'm also happy to share that we've made some really good progress in terms of our clean energy portfolio. When we first started, our 4-year average was about 31%. We now have a 4-year average of about 50, almost 51% over that 4-year period. So we added 3,800 megawatts of new, long, short-term clean resources to our portfolio. Now, while we didn't meet the goal, we had an original goal of 54 and a half across that 4-year period. Uh, some of the challenges we saw were higher than expected customer demand and a really historic drought conditions, which really made some lower hydro come through in a couple of the years there. But we still feel we made some really good strides in terms of the clean energy transition and equitable distribution of benefits. Now, when we first started, and the EAG first started in 2021, it really changed our approach on equity, really helping us understand some of those vulnerability factors, really helping us think more about uh, place-based analysis and program design. And EAG also contributed to our equity framework with really clear definitions, a targeting mechanism, and really accountability measures. We've talked about customer benefit indicators. Those are the metrics that we put together, we put together to really track and show our progress over time. And so we highlight those customer benefit indicators and the progress we've made over the past 4 years. And then also leaning from your insight, pathways for community co-design in some of our programs and products. Now, a lot of this is detailed in the report itself. I'll mention a couple other outreach and engagement areas, including multilingual outreach, enhanced financial assistance, community partnerships, and our empowerment pilot paid focus group session. All of those came through in the past 4 years and all help to move forward on a more equitable, clean energy future. Now, there are a few relevant regulatory requirements related to equity, and I want to talk a bit at a high level about where we landed in some of those areas. If you'll remember, we were given a regulatory directive to ensure that 30% of energy benefits were directed to customers in named communities, and those benefits were from the different customer-sided programs that we have, customer-sided groups that we have. And we also had to define 2.5% of energy benefits directed towards customers in the deepest need. And so we had that 30% goal that we were looking towards for named communities. We had a 2.5% goal of energy benefits directed towards customers in the deepest need. I'm happy to report that we exceeded the 2.5% goal across the different buckets that we talked about earlier. And for the 30% goal, we exceeded or came sort of close on some of those. Energy efficiency and demand response exceeded that 30%. But we had some challenges with distributed solar and distributed batteries, which is part of the reason why we're here today, actually, and Melissa, Ray, and I will talk more about later on. But we saw some challenges with distributed solar and battery, and so they did not reach that 30% level. We were only at around 23, 27%. But nonetheless, we've learned a lot from that process, and we're looking forward to building upon a really strong foundation for our clean energy transition as we look forward to developing the ISP in our next implementation phase. So I'll stop there and see if there's any questions. Link, yes, I think we can get a link. Thank you, Ray.
Excellent. Ray's on it. So as I'm particularly interested from the members when you're looking at your priority framework, our goals around accessibility, affordability, accountability, and advocacy, and you're hearing this update, what's coming to mind as far as the impacts you feel like we're getting closer to based on what you've heard? So while you think about that question, Boz got their hand up, and then I'll read Monica's comment after.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say shout out to the team, right? So this is amazing, and I know it takes a whole village to make things like this happen. This makes me very hopeful, right? If we were looking for like 2.5, and we exceeded all across those 4 buckets. So that's good news, and shout out. And I think it makes me very hopeful. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, truly a team effort. I cannot say that enough. There's a really great team behind the scenes doing this. So thank you.
And Monica has some questions in the chat. Feel free to answer whenever it makes sense. Will the UTC respond to this report? If so, do they make a policy statement regarding shortfalls? And 2, is PAC planning on adjusting the projected clean energy target?
Thank you for those questions, Monica. So the first one, the UTC will respond. Right now, we are in a comment period. PSE's comment period goes until October 20th. Once that comment period closes, there will be an open meeting where our clean energy compliance report will be discussed with the commissioners, and they will take a position. They will make an action related to the report itself. I do not know that they will make a policy statement. I'm actually unsure how far they will go, just because this is the first one. But I presume they will react to the targets we put forth, the progress on equity, all of the reasonable progress we've made in terms of bringing clean energy resources to our portfolio. And really, there are set requirements that are established in rules that they will have to respond to. And that's the way we've written it, so that the commissioners are able to respond to those particular requirements based on the report. You had one more. Is PSE planning on adjusting the projected clean energy targets? So we did not have a 2025 CEIP. If we did, we would have submitted another set of targets. But because we have the ISP, in the ISP, PSE will establish some new targets moving forward for the next implementation period. Oh, thank you, Ashley.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I
Whole
put in the
team.
chat. Hi, I'm Ashley King. I'm in the regulatory team. That they won't write a policy statement, which is usually a fairly long document that gives guidance, but they are required to make a formal determination about whether or not PSE is in compliance with CETA for that period. And this report is the evidence that allows them to make that determination. So, yeah, that's what they'll do. It'll be like a thumbs up, thumbs down.
Oh, Brian, were you going to respond?
No, I'm sorry. I was reading Elizabeth's question.
Oh, okay. Well, as you ponder, I'll verbalize it. Elizabeth asks, does the report describe the mix of renewable resources added, and is it in the distributed solar and batteries?
Yeah, so the report describes a lot of it describes a mix of the resources that were added. Some are the distributed solar and storage. So in there, we talk about the different products and programs. Like you'll see us talk about solar energy credit and net metering and community solar. But you'll also see us talk about the large scale resources that we either acquired or bought energy from, both short term and long term. You'll see that discussed in the report as well. So there's a mix of different resources. I mean, it's everything, right? It takes it all to come together. So it's a mix of different resources that we highlight in the report that we needed to help move towards the number of targets that we had there. And I'm glad this picture's up, because this picture kind of highlights the various buckets that we had to really think about and really achieve. One thing I'll highlight is that we had a demand response and energy efficiency target, and then we established a DER solar and DER storage target as well. And this really just gives you a picture of all the different things that we were juggling to sort of put together in that 4-year period. So Elizabeth, hopefully that helps answer that. Maybe.
We've got even more questions. Elizabeth,
Oh,
feel free to come off if you have a follow-up. But we do have a question about the challenges that you faced with solar and storage that you mentioned. And that question comes from Anthony.
All right. Well, thank you, Anthony. Anthony's been reading ahead because this is something we are going to talk about later on as well. But I do want to take the time to talk about it here. I will say that the biggest challenges we had was costs. It was just really high cost for customers to participate in some of the solar programs. The other thing we saw was the additional upgrades that were needed on homes in order for customers to participate. And I'm talking directly on specific programs where a customer would have storage or solar on their roof or anything like that. Again, we had other programs where customers could participate that did not require customers to bring on some of those resources, those assets, onto a roof. But that was really one of the major barriers was the high cost. And one other barrier I should say challenge that we found, and we'll talk about this later, is customers were really prioritizing other things. Bringing solar and storage wasn't their priority. It's not that they didn't care. It's not that they didn't want it. It was just not the priority for many of the customers that we talked to. And that's understandable. So we'll talk more about that later on, Anthony, but thank you for the question.
More questions and comments from the group on this update? All really great questions. As I'm reflecting on your priority action sheet, do a little binder check. If you've got your priorities in front of you, it feels like this really is squarely under accountability and understanding and getting that report back in perspective on how PSE is being that reliable partner and demonstrating commitment and coming back to us. So just wanting to place that in our framework. And these have been great questions. And our system level impact that we're trying to achieve in that space is that the quantitative and qualitative results reflect the experiential results of distributional equity efforts. And so again, Brian talked about what the customers actually need and feel, and how is that connecting to what we're counting. And that's exactly the kind of conversation that we want to make sure is in alignment. So great job, everyone. Closing comments, questions for Brian on this update before we move into the main part of the presentation? Brilliant. Of course, the chat's always there for you. Thank you, Brian. We are going to move into the main part of the conversation, and I'm going to invite some other voices. Both Melissa Troy and Ray Outlaw are here, the ISP team, to join Brian. We are talking about how PSE plans to distribute and measure clean energy benefits for deepest need customers. And so in this conversation, we're going to understand and revisit the history and the origin of deepest need and minimum designation, those concepts in general. We're going to review the challenges and known barriers to current condition requirements, as well as collecting feedback on potential approaches to delivering energy benefits that PSE plans to propose in the 2027 ISP. And so this is a consult level that we're working on, and two objectives. We are focused on community-centered priorities around clean energy benefits for deepest need customers, and PSE's approach to delivering and measuring progress towards equitable distribution of clean energy benefits to deepest need customers. The commission, the UTC, expects meaningful advisory group engagement around this topic. And so you are a key part of this conversation. And also the EAG was essential in helping to design those definitions of deepest need. And so is a very, is the best partner in some ways to discuss this in the context of equity. And so because we're at a consult level, if you want to look back at the appendix to see where that is. And the areas that I've starred, again, it feels like it touches on so much, but particularly accessibility, affordability, and accountability when it comes to the priority framework that this group is working on together. System level impacts include greater leverage of the connection PSE has with named communities and deepest need customers in PSE investment decisions. Elimination of high energy burden, that quantitative and qualitative results reflect experiential results of the distributional equity efforts, and that policy and practice change in the areas of energy affordability, reliability, sufficiency, and abundance are made possible through your work. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to, right, Brian, you're still up?
I'm still up.
Awesome.
Melissa's going to come join me in a couple slides here, but I'm going to kick us off here. Thank you, Aaron, for starting us off. If I can just level set and make sure all the EAG members are just understanding. So I'm going to talk through a little bit of the history and background, and it's primarily related to the conditions related to the 30% and the 2.5% that I talked about earlier. Our goal at the end is we want to have that discussion about that language. We want to think about the intent, the true intent of that condition language. And so I'm going to talk about the history, kind of what happened. Melissa's going to help talk about what we learned from different customers. And we really want to circle back to have a discussion on the intent with these conditions and how we can sort of progress moving forward here. Okay. So I'm going to start with engagement. So we're here today. We're going to talk about minimum designation. We're going to follow that up on September in our September meeting with a follow-up conversation again on minimum designation. The rest of these boxes really outline what engagement is going to look like as we move through filing our first ISP. And as you can see, the filing won't happen until April. So we have a number of boxes for the next 3 to 4 months. You're going to see a lot of us over the next 3 to 4 months, leading up until the holidays. We will publish a draft ISP. We'll take time to bring in comment, hear your feedback, have office hours, all of that before we file the finished product out in April. So we just wanted to set this stage to give you all some insight to the number of times we will be talking about the ISP as we lead to the filing here. Okay, next slide. Now, some of you were in our sort of ISP workshop 101 sessions that Ray and I did a couple weeks ago. So this slide should look familiar to you, but we really are hearkening back to what is the ISP doing? And the ISP is bringing together some discrete planning exercises within the company, bringing them together to make one cohesive integrated system plan. Okay. Today, we are only focused on one area of that plan, and that particular area is customer programs and products. Okay. So when we talk about minimum designation, when we talk about equitable distribution of benefits, today's conversation is focused on customer programs and products. All right. Let's go to the next slide. Now, I'm going to get into a bit of the history here in the next couple slides, and then Melissa's going to jump in here. We want to start with some core concepts just for a bit of a refresher, a bit of background as we move through here. And we start with these 3 concepts because this really grounded how these conditions, how the 30%, 2.5% sort of gets built up. And really starts with CETA, where CETA calls out that we have to think about and transition and think about the equitable distribution of benefits and reduction of burdens. That is core to CETA. That is one of the tenets. And so that is also core to what we are doing in terms of the distribution of benefits through these various conditions. Now, the other 2 concepts, the EAG is very, very familiar with because you all helped bring together these definitions. So when we think about named communities, which is a combination of highly impacted communities and vulnerable populations, the factors that make up vulnerable populations are factors that this group helped to enshrine, helped to come up with, helped to define as we move forward. So again, you all were at the forefront of helping us understand who are our most vulnerable populations, where might they be geographically. And so we use that definition as part of what you'll see later in the condition language. The last concept you see here is deepest need. Now, this is one, again, this group, the EAG and other advisory groups, interested parties, really help to define and zero in on who are our, not just vulnerable populations, but thinking about customers who are in some of the most dire circumstances and conditions, some who are exhibiting a large amount of challenges. And so here, what we have here is this definition that really thinks about severe energy burden, the plus the multiple compounding factors that are hindering the ability to access adequate resources. So this group helped also define deepest need, and this is also a really foundational piece as we get through talking through these conditions here. Okay, so these concepts you're going to hear us talk about over and over again. So just want you all to be familiar with as we move forward. Okay, let's go to the next slide. All right, now we get into a bit more of the history. So in 2021, we filed our first CEIP. In 2023, we received an order from the commission, and one of the conditions, which is a requirement from the condition, is the words that you see on the screen here. This condition required PSE to designate 30% of the energy benefits go directly to customers in named communities. Now, we talked about this earlier, right, in the compliance report. So again, 30% of the energy benefits had to be directed towards customers in named communities. Now, the way we think about this is, well, the way the language is written is the benefits come from DER solar, DER storage, demand response, and energy efficiency. So again, thinking about those groups of resources or tranches of resources, tranche of resources, 30% of the benefits have to be focused on have to be directed towards customers in named communities. So here's an example. If we have 100 megawatts of DER solar, 30 of those megawatts have to be directed towards customers in named communities, right? And that's what we embarked on since this condition came about in 2023. And that's what we just talked about earlier in the compliance report. Now, the other piece that came out of this condition was that we would commit to a targeting approach to identify customers and communities with the deepest need. Not only do we have to identify customers in the deepest need, but we also need to designate a percentage of energy benefits that will be directed towards customers in the deepest need, which we did that in the 23 biennium. So if I can pull back, we have a 30% of energy benefits directed towards customers in named communities. We also get defined deepest need, and PSE, you decide on a percentage to designate towards customers in the deepest need, to direct energy benefits to customers in the deepest need. So I just want to lay those out. Like those are really the big three things that we were thinking about back in 2023. Okay. I think I can
Any
pause.
questions or yeah, just pausing that. So you gave a really great example of the 30%, like if we do X amount of DER solar, we have to make sure the 30% is being targeted towards the named communities. Is there a similar analogy you can make with the deepest need group or?
Oh, yeah. It would be similar. So instead of if you had 100 megawatts of DER solar, you would need 2.5 megawatts of DER solar directed towards customers in the deepest need. So yes, it's a similar math, if you will, breakdown for deepest need as well. Now,
Super helpful.
I see there's a question in the chat. I think Oxy, you have the question on how was the 2.5% target for deepest need customers decided? Thank you for that question. Excuse me. So when we received the first condition, this one here, we thought about a proportional share at that time, and I believe the proportional share was around 5 or 6% of deepest need. But then we had to think about what would be feasible and what could we implement in the 2 years remaining. And so the goal is That's where that 2.5% comes from. It's so it's sort of based on the proportional share of deepest need customers, but half just because we were halfway through the implementation period, and that's where we're moving for on the 2.5%. So,
Other
hopefully that
question.
helps.
Okay. Paul, go
Uh,
ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, does that mean we can reevaluate from 2.5 to 3%, 4%? Does this mean that since we were halfway through the year, that's why we decided to go with the 2.5?
Yeah, thank you for that, Bob. So let's go not to the next slide, but the following slide, because you all are getting here, and I'm glad we're going in this direction. So we then, after we filed our 2023 biennial, we then got another condition, and that condition said, now PSE, you must set a minimum designation that is at least equal to the proportion of customers in the deepest need, meaning whatever percentage of our customers are in the deepest need, that is the percentage we need to designate in the ISP. I know it says 25 CEIP. We did not do one of those. And so now we have the ISP. And so, yes, to your point, we now have the opportunity and will designate a new percentage for the next implementation period. And that will have to be based on the proportion of customers in the deepest need across our service territory.
Did you want me to go back to the other slide?
You can. Alex, I want to be sure that that was clear because I saw you had a follow-up question, but hopefully what I just said makes okay. Cool.
Super clear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, Aaron, let's go back to the previous slide. Okay, so tranche of resources. This was a new flavor of term. And so the intent here was thinking about not just the individual programs. So not thinking, oh, if you have 100 megawatts to community solar, then 30 megawatts of that community solar has to go to customers in named communities. The idea is that you think about it in terms of groups, in terms of buckets. So we can look at energy efficiency programs as a whole, or DER solar programs as a whole, as opposed to thinking about each individual program there. And so that is an area where I think we want to continue to talk about here with the group. But that's where the tranche of resource is. That's where that came from and what that really meant here. Okay. So I think we can move forward on the next slide. Actually, yeah, I think so. I'm going to turn it over to Melissa now. So now we've got the framing on the different condition languages, sort of what happened with the 30%, the 2.5. Now we're ready to do a whole new sort of percentage. But again, I go back to what I said at the beginning, which is we think this is an opportunity to really look at the intent and to revisit that language. So Melissa, I'm gonna turn it to you to really take us further down that path.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And again, my name is Melissa Troy. I use she, her pronouns. So I'm the supervisor of our customer outreach team. So that's the field team that does a lot of in-person connections and reaching customers that have the most barriers to participate. So really excited to be here, but made sure that if we haven't met face-to-face or been previously introduced, now you know where I come from and who we engage on a day-to-day basis. So what we wanted to have for today's conversation is to focus on the intent of the conditions. So making sure that the clean energy transition is both fair, reasonable, inclusive, and works for everybody. Our goal is to ensure that vulnerable communities are not left carrying the greater share of the costs, and they're able to participate in and benefit from the transition in the ways that meets their needs and their circumstances. Our programs are most successful when they're flexible and where they meet customers where they're at. This means everything from designing outreach, enrollment processes, incentives, support services around the priorities and the needs of our communities. So through our customer engagement work, we've definitely learned that many of the clean energy programs don't always match what deepest need customers tell us they need most and how they want to participate in the transition. It's important that we continue to listen to customers and find ways to reduce barriers so that the benefits of the clean energy transition are accessible and meaningful to those who need them most. So that kind of sets the intent of what the condition language is, and we'll move into the barriers next. So this is what I know a lot of you had questions around. So when we look at the programs through the eyes of our customers, we often find that the time, effort, cost, paperwork required to participate can feel greater than the benefit that they end up receiving. Many households, especially those who are struggling with affordability or immediate needs like paying bills, maintaining their housing, and supporting their families naturally is going to come first. We've seen some success where barriers were reduced and benefits were delivered at the community level. So, for example, we've worked on potential partnerships with community-based organizations and tribes to bring battery storage and solar projects to affordable housing communities. We've also seen really positive results from cities and community organizations that partner and provide broader home improvement services like energy upgrades, but that's offered alongside maybe some housing, health, and safety improvements that customers already value and need. These approaches can typically combine like things like funding sources, simplifying the process, and reducing the burden on the individual customer. What customers tell us is getting in their way. They're placing a big deal of trust in us by giving us that information. And so we want to honor that trust by listening and addressing those barriers first, rather than expecting customers to adapt to programs that may not fit their needs or circumstances. So, any of these barriers or things that you're seeing on the screen, if they're making sense to you, feel free to kind of add commentary in the chat, or if you've got any questions about some of those barriers, we can take those.
I'm particularly interested, Anthony, you asked the question about the barriers and challenges. Do any of these surprise you?
No, especially with the upfront costs. I know that this kind of technology for the individual on the individual level is definitely high.
Okay.
Excellent. Well, I will turn it over to Brian to talk about some of the numbers that we did see from 2025.
All right, thanks, Melissa. And so these are all in the compliance report. Another plug, but these are some of the, what I would say, some of the numbers that we saw over the past, or actually at the end of 2025. In the circle, we heard, I think there was someone raised a point of, it's good to see the numbers, right? Get a baseline, right? This sort of gives you that baseline of where we ended in 2025. Of course, the report will talk about what happened in 23 and 24 and so forth. But as you can see here, the results were rather varied across the different, again, tranches, groups of resources. So energy efficiency, demand response did really well. And again, this is related to the 2.5% goal. So keep that in mind. This is in comparison to the 2.5% goal. So energy efficiency, demand response, we were able to get up to 11.8% for 11.8% for directing those energy benefits to customers in the deepest need. For distributed solar and storage, to Melissa's point, while we had some trouble, we were able to meet 5%, 3% lower, closer to that 2.5. But again, those barriers that Melissa, Anthony just talked about in terms of costs, in terms of upgrades needed, excuse me, those were some of the things that we saw, some of the challenges we saw. And so really taking a step back and thinking, how can we continue knowing that we see the challenges that we see right now, and what are ways that we can really re-envision and rethink through energy benefits and rethink the language that we're seeing here. Okay, Next
I
slide.
just wanted to, as we move on, I wanted to acknowledge that Christina also agrees from the previous slide that those are common barriers that make accessing these services out of reach. And then Monica has her hand up. Go ahead, Monica.
I was just curious if for this distributed solar and storage, are the majority of projects that are benefiting like named communities, etc., um, are those mostly like retail, like household customers, or are those projects that are community-based projects and maybe it's like a local church or community center that has solar and storage at their location?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Monica. So this is exactly where we want to go in the conversation, is because one of the ways we were thinking about energy benefits for customers in the deepest need was leaning more towards the residential side. And we were thinking more about community solar is a great one, where if you have a customer who is participating in community solar and is a deepest need customer, that would count, right? But if you put something like, I'm going to use your example, um, or a rooftop solar on a food bank, or storage at a food bank, or at a community-based organization, um, even though a deepest need customer has some benefit because they may go to that food bank, may use some of the resources there, we weren't counting it. And so that's where this group can really help us think through, should we be counting some of those community-based programs, some of those community-based projects towards this goal? I think that'd be really helpful for us to have that discussion, Monica. So I think you're bringing up a really good point of something that we've been thinking about lately, because initially it was very much focused on the residential side. But because we do see some benefit that for customers in the deepest need, they are they are receiving some benefit from that, let's call it a food bank, right? That food bank is also receiving a benefit having that solar on their roof, right? There may be a reduction in their bills, which means they can provide more services to customers in the deepest need. Now, I'd like to test that thinking with you all. At least that's sort of what we're thinking, and what we've heard is that that is the line of thinking, how we can really connect the community-based projects to customers in the deepest need and really show that through line in terms of benefits. But Monica, it'd really be good to hear from you. I know we probably had a couple more slides to hear from you though. Like, does that make sense? I mean, is that something you think is a strong connection we could make?
I think it could be.
Yeah.
Like I'm a little like I don't have my mind set yet, but I think that it could be. I'm kind of curious like about this idea of like I forget what the exact terminology was, but like a climate resilience hub in communities of deepest need and like how
Mm,
those could be engineered or be a resource. I'd love for the whatever solar storage projects to be a direct resource and not just an offset to a CDO's operations.
mm,
I think that's the thing that's kind of percolating in my mind and that I want to see if we're counting it.
yeah, I get that.
And then to that point, Megan asks, how would you get that information? And following that, we've got Ba and Christina with their hands up, but to Megan's question, how would you get that information to
Yeah,
actually?
and you don't have to answer it now. That's a huge question, I think, but that was just me thinking out loud for a second.
No, that was gonna be
Um,
my exact question as well. So I probably
okay.
want to lower my hand there. Thank you.
So this is really interesting because uh, if you remember, Uche on the team came to this group must have been last fall, and we were discussing um, sort of the revisions to our customer benefit indicators. One of the things we talked about is a sort of post report for our solar grant recipients. And in that report, being able to ask them some more detailed questions about how does this grant, how do these solar project benefit not just the organization, but also the individuals that are receiving benefits from this organization. So to answer your question, Megan, about we right now are thinking of directly asking those community-based organizations. Now, they are not required to answer these things. It is voluntary, but we have started to ask them directly, how have these things um, benefited from these particular resources?
So
So can
Bon,
I jump?
Megan had the same question, but go ahead, Bon.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, yeah, I love the idea and I think it's awesome. But the thing is, it's gonna be really hard for us to track it individually because obviously from finance, you have direct charge, you have indirect charge. So, and you don't control that. PSE doesn't control this would be considered indirect charges, right? So something that you don't control is gonna be really hard for you to measure it. That's just
Yeah.
my 2 cents. But thank you.
No, I that's definitely one of the challenges we have here. And one area that we have seen success, like it says here, was in energy efficiency, right? Where you might be able to see more of those direct benefits, and that's probably why efficiency has been so successful, right? Where you have weatherization or insulation or something like that, where it's right there in a customer's home or even in a CBO's home, and you can see those direct benefits, whether on the bill or something like that. And so I agree. It's tough. I mean, that's why we're here to have that sort of conversation with you all to really think through. I hear you, the community benefit side. We think that is an area we can really tap into, but it's just trying to think through how to make that happen. Christina, I saw
So
your hand. Oh, go ahead, Ari.
I am going to have us do our last couple of slides because this is our entire next hour is
Yes,
talking through these
that's
comments, and I want to make sure that we get through our slides so I can get you your break so we can get back and start hearing from everyone. So, but did someone have a follow-up quickly, or as I move to the next slide?
I think
Okay.
the only thing I was going to quickly add, Brian, is that both energy efficiency and demand response also have many components of those two tranches do have programs that are very low cost, very easy to access, not as high of a barrier when it comes to just sheer like high upfront cost. So you
Mhm.
can see that a lot of those programs and the participation rate is a bit higher, and we were able to accomplish much more in those spaces because we also had programs that were a lot more accessible for customers.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Melissa.
And for just as I'm not losing comments in the chat. When we get back from discussion, we will start with those questions and comments that are coming in the chat. So go ahead, Brian.
Yeah. So I'll quickly do this, and then Melissa, if you want to wrap us up. So I talked about this a lot, which is this group has been a really key partner in the Clean Energy Compliance Report, our transition here. We've got a long history from the beginning, back in the creation in 2020, right? Where we talked about defining customers in the deepest need and defining those factors for vulnerable populations, really aligning on what energy benefits should look like. You all really were paramount in helping to think about the community and the customer perspective and really driving some of those solutions forward. And so I say all that to say that this group has an incredible wealth of historical background, of knowledge, and really, really glad we can all come together and talk about this and continue to discuss the progress moving forward here. So I think that really sets us up for the discussion. So I'm going to kick it over to Melissa.
All right, we'll move it on to the next slide. So this is one of my favorite images. Thank you, Ray, for putting that together. But one of the challenges that we're faced with by meeting some and delivering some of these benefits to deepest need customers is that some of our programs can be very difficult to participate in. And for many of those programs, the benefits don't feel as immediate to customers as lower bills or reliable service. When we're talking and working directly with customers, we see this every day in the reality We hear about choices that customers are having to make, the challenges that they face, how those experiences affect their ability to participate in the clean energy transition. And so it reminds us all the time that equity is more than just simply making programs available. Customers are asking for support that fits their needs and their circumstances. For some customers, it might mean that they want access to new, clean energy technologies, but for others, it might mean that we need to address the affordability concerns of removing barriers so they can participate and benefit over time. So we really want to kind of ground us in the core intent of delivering the benefits to deepest need customers, but also being really impactful and present into what they're telling us that they need in this moment and being able to meet them where they are. So we'll move to the next slide. So that's what we're actually proposing to adjust our approach with you today for minimum designations in the 2027 ISP. So some of the things that we're thinking about is aggregating benefits rather than a focus on like a uniform delivery over tranches. Remember those 4 different buckets that Brian went over. We want to expand our calculation to include resources that offer community benefits to deepest need customers. Definitely some more conversation to get into. You guys have already asked some really great questions here. And we want to prioritize delivering programs and services that customers are telling us they need and want, rather than the programs we have to deliver on in the ways that we have to deliver them. So for the discussion and something to think about as you go into break is, does this feel like a reasonable and responsive approach? And do you have any additional ideas or suggestions that we should consider as we build this out into our new ISP? I'll turn it back over to Erin.
Thank you so much. We are right at 6. And as you keep having questions, if you want to put them in the chat as we go on break, I am going to put something in the chat for you to open up now, but think about later. And that is the post-meeting survey. And so we're really hoping to make sure that folks complete this after the meeting. If you want to open it up and put it in the window and hide it, that's coming from M, who's OOO, but in honor of M, do your post-meeting survey. We will be coming back in 10 minutes at 6:10. Public comment starts at 6:50. And for those watching, the instructions for public comment are up for you to take note of now. And otherwise, EAG members, we will see you at Giving us switched over. And then fill. And we are going to copy the excellent. Hello, welcome back, everybody. As we get started again, I am going to ask for our EAG members to go ahead and click that link in the chat. That's called the Mentimeter link. And to get settled in there, I think you have to put in your name, at least on the back end. They will appear anonymous on the front end. And what we're going to try this time is I'm going to put up a timer that's for 3 minutes. And I'm going to ask everyone to reflect on what we've heard and then to submit your feedback in written format. One, so that we can really engage folks on the live, as well as so you can collect your thoughts for our discussion. And then after that time, we're going to start with the questions that we had in the chat beforehand. And then we're going to start going through the ideas and comments that you all came up with. So there's a 3-minute timer on the window. You'll be able to continue answering after that. It's just to help us and to give you an opportunity to put your thoughts in there before we start talking. So, and I also invite folks who are viewing on the YouTube to answer the same question, and you can put it in the YouTube chat, and we will be recording those and adding them to the feedback tracker that is released with the meeting summary on the EAG website. And a heads up for those who had previous questions in the chat, since we're in discussion mode, I will probably ask you to verbalize your comment. And so you can give us additional context because it's the perfect time for that. So in a bit, we'll start with Anthony. Troy's got a question. Megan had a question. And then Monica had a question. And then we'll turn to the board. Another minute or so. Looks like we've got 15 people in here. And do please let us know if you're having issues with the link. 30 more seconds and we'll start talking.
So did you say the link is in the chat?
The link is in the chat. If you were on the phone, you can feel free to verbalize your comments and we will make sure they get into the tracker on the back end. Aksa, if you remember, that's actually how we did your feedback last time. And so that was very helpful for us. Okay, sounds great, Megan. All right. So you should be able to keep adding questions and answers, but I am going to turn us to our first question from Anthony. So Anthony, can you tell us what you were thinking with your public slash government comment?
Yeah, I guess I was also just mentioning, I think Troy responded saying that it aligns with the CBOs, the community-based organizations. And since cost is kind of a thing, usually if you go towards the community or the public level or government municipality, usually they always have stuff at the county or the city level where they're trying to work on that funding as a collective for that community. So maybe that could be used. And then hopefully the building's in a better shape than most people in those named communities where they don't have to have that upfront cost of that storage or solar, and it can be more focused towards the, like, community solar, kind of what they're thinking about with the food bank, how that helps out that food bank and all that. Especially if it goes towards, I think someone mentioned like climate resilience hubs, which I think the city of Seattle is already starting to do. I don't know if it's going at King County level, but maybe it could work towards that to where you have that resiliency, where you don't have the total customer cost that people have to do for, especially on those houses where, like you mentioned, if they're putting rooftop solar, you got to make sure the roof is good to go. And then storage batteries, you got to make sure you have a place and all the electricals up to code and all that that can handle that storage. So that was kind of my thing, is maybe that will help with the cost if we take it add it to that extra community or CBO to where it's a public building or government building, and that's in that sense.
ISB team, any follow-up questions or reflections of that?
Well, thanks for that, Anthony. I do agree and like the idea that, you know, you're bringing some of those community benefits using sort of the government contract framework, if you will. So I think it's a really good idea, interesting idea, Anthony. Thanks for raising that.
And then Megan, you were kind of on the same wavelength, talking about the solar panel. Do you feel like you got your question answered or your clarification there?
Yeah. I was just,
Wonderful.
I'm thinking about the ways to collect data, because that's what I do, is collect data. So I'm just, if everybody's using a food bank, it's like, do they give out a survey? I don't know. Did they give out a survey of who's using it and what their income is or what their needs are? I don't know.
Awesome. Monica, I know you wrote it in the chat, but will you verbalize your question? Because I'll just read it verbatim. And this is your time.
I'm sorry. Yes.
Oh,
Huh?
is that okay? If you need me to, I can. Are you good too?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm in one of those modes where I have like 5 things in my head. So I think I found my comment.
This one was about how you're curious about the barriers preventing customers from fully participating.
Yeah. So I think I was most concerned about distributed solar and distributed storage. And I hear you on initial cost, but I'm just wondering, like, it seems like community solar is like a big component of the distributed solar. So like, my understanding is that's typically pretty geographically limited in terms of what customers it can reach, practically. So I'm just wondering how much of this is literally like, did a significant proportion of deepest needs customers even have access to community solar to be able to participate in the first place? Is it more like a number of projects and geographic challenge as opposed to just simply a cost challenge? I just want to make sure I like fully understand the barriers before I kind of like agree on this and kind of like, yeah, we can lump everything together kind of thing.
Awesome. So we're going to hear from the response, and then Christina's got her hand up, and we'll go to Rachel, and then we'll go to the board. Go ahead, Ray.
Okay. Thank you, Monica. It's a great question. I can speak to our experience from the DER empowerment pilot that we spoke to the EAG probably a year or so ago about. What we heard largely from the 4 groups of customers that we talked to is that solar in particular was very interesting and appealing. Storage, I would say the interest it varied across demographics a little bit more. But I think what we're talking about here is there are these sort of layered barriers to to solar and storage, and that you're absolutely right. First, just geographically, right, do you have a home, right? Second, does your home face the right way? And is it surrounded by trees or is it not surrounded by trees? For example, we did an empowerment group out in Kitsap Peninsula, and two of them actually, and we heard a lot of, I have lots of trees. I don't want to take down my trees so that I can have solar on my property, right? Megan, I think we've heard from you that on your side of the mountains, at least you've got some open space. So maybe you don't put it on the roof, but you put it somewhere on the property, right? So there are options there and benefits. But so as you sort of peel the onion, there just continue to be barriers all the way towards implementation on rooftop solar or customer-owned solar, customer-owned batteries. And so I'm not sure I'm fully answering your question, but I think we do know a lot more than we did 2, 3, 4 years ago. I think we will inevitably never know enough and always be chasing what's the right answer and what's the right formula to help people find and be able to benefit from these solutions. The one thing I can say with absolute confidence is that people love, love, love community solar and income eligible community solar, because those are solar panels put on, schools or government buildings like we've talked about here that people can get shares, and those shares immediately reduce their bills. So we get bill assistance, we get participated in the clean energy transformation, and we get the sense of I'm part of this, even if I can't put that solar panel on my roof or my backyard. So we know a lot more than we did, but we're still going to be chasing a lot of answers, I think, for a long time.
So Christina had her hand up. We'll go to Rachel, and then we'll go to the board to start reading off some of these comments. Go ahead, Christina.
Thank you for all your presentations. It's been very enlightening. It's very well put together, and it's very important work you guys are doing. I do have a question though. Folks living in deepest needs, they may or may not have the capacity to be able to leverage a lot of these different programs. So how are we approaching that? That's one. Another one is living in a rural area. I just had a conversation with one of my friends that is a first responder, and he was mentioning that not all communities have the capacity to put out a battery fire. And also what education are we giving the community, especially if we're doing solar or doing residential solar installation? Because if a homeowner says, oh, there's a fire, and they bring out their hose and start spraying their battery, I mean, it can get bad really quick. So are we thinking about this as well when we are, going into those communities and asking about bringing those communities to them? Because are we thinking about the potential harm that a community can inversely be exposed to, while the benefit? So I think just it would be important to have a conversation of both the benefit and some of the risks, just so first of all, bring clarification to the community, and also I think it would build trust within the community too, if folks know that you are looking at both sides, the pros and the cons. Thanks.
Great question.
So, Christina, I'll start and see if anyone else from the team wants to jump in here. You mentioned at the top that deepest need, what did you say? Deepest need customers may not be able to leverage some of the existing programs, and how do we address that? I think that's what we're also trying to figure out. So we just talked about community solar, right? And how accessible it is, because you don't have to have you don't have to own the property, right? You don't have to have a roof that's at a certain condition. And in some cases, if you're income eligible, you do not have to put any money forth, right? You don't have to pay into it. And so those are the type of programs I think provide a greater level of accessibility. And so I think part of this is thinking through how can we develop or create programs or products that are going to meet customers where they're at, especially customers in the deepest need. So we've got to think through that. And we also have to think through what are those additional benefits that they can incur from some of the programs. And so an instance could be maybe, and I know we talked about sort of resilience hubs, but maybe there is a setup where a storage and battery really helps a specific segment of cluster of deepest need customers. That's just an example, right? Where the customers may not be able to specifically participate and purchase those different resources, but it is providing an energy benefit from a resilience standpoint, right? Like that is an example where if you put together a project, you're now providing those benefits, and the customers do not have to think about that upfront cost. And so I think that's where we're trying to think through what are those different areas. Sorry, what are the different ways we can think about the programs, how they look, but also what are the different benefits that we can tease out from some of the existing programs and products that are out there. I do not have, I have to think more about the battery. I think you bring up a really good sort of infrastructure question about the batteries, and communities that may not have the safety or the systems in place to prevent those sorts of risks. So thank you for raising that, Christine. I've got to take that back and think about that some more, because I think that's a really good one to highlight as we're thinking about DER batteries in various communities.
Yeah, absolutely. Megan, I see your comment. So that we acknowledge and honor folks that did some writing. I am going to read a couple off the board and then go to Megan. And then I think we can then start responding to some of the comments on the board. So I was scrolling a little bit, but to the question of does this feel like a reasonable approach? What other ideas or suggestions should PSE consider? Someone said no to aggregating benefits across tranches. Another said maybe to expanding the calculation to include community benefits. We would need to refine this before it's a yes for them. Aggregated benefits make sense to ensure customers are accessing the programs most helpful to them. How are we tracking what customers tell us they need and want? Another comment is, yes, I think these are reasonable. Some of these require more thought than others, but especially agree with the aggregating benefits and prioritizing programs. So we're starting to see a dichotomy here, and I'm really excited for that discussion about aggregating and tranches versus not aggregating tranches. Wanting a little bit more clarity about maybe what aggregating benefits actually means. And so maybe we can talk a little bit about that. Looking for maybe a more robust explanation of the barriers, particularly for distributed solar and distributed battery. Very interesting comment that we even just talked about, that kind of behavioral knowledge about what do you do when a battery is on fire. That's something that people just don't maybe know for sure. How often are customers giving that feedback about what they need and want? And yes, customers have different needs. I think some differentiation across tranches is necessary. So again, that balance against differentiation versus aggregation. Inclusion of resources that offer community benefits. Curious to know what the scope of this is in reference to the individual benefit rather than what we're just kind of hearing aggregates. So if we do go to community benefits, does that somehow diminish the individual benefit, and just making sure there's the trade-off is the best one for the customer? Reasonable approach, tracking by tranche is important. So I'm wondering if you can touch on the aggregation question because it seems like there's a lot of commentary there. And so yeah, what is the argument about aggregating versus not aggregating those benefits across tranches? And then I will go to the chat.
Yeah, so I'll start and definitely invite Melissa and Ray, or Ray, you can go ahead if you have something.
Brian, I do have something, but if you want to start, go ahead.
The idea with aggregating benefits is really trying to understand or trying to capture the benefits across all these different programs. As we mentioned earlier, we're really seeing a challenge when you just have the DER solar and the batteries, and you have even energy efficiency and demand response, where those energy efficiency has been around for a really long time and demand response is starting to get there. And Melissa talked earlier about some of the sort of upfront capital and some of the existing structures that are there financially for those programs. And so I, I think aggregating benefits really helps leverage the sum total of all the different resources coming together, as opposed to just disaggregating into individual buckets where we know we're having some challenges there. So that's really the thinking on some of the aggregation of benefits. I definitely welcome Ray and Melissa and their thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. You all are absolutely correct. This first bullet in particular is pretty vague, and that this conversation is exactly what we needed, because we need to bring back a more concrete, what does it actually mean to aggregate benefits? How would we aggregate some tranche type concept into unique buckets that make sense? So I think my response to this is keep putting your thoughts in the discussion board or in the chat or wherever you want to put them, because we'll use all this feedback to help refine this concept of each of these three bullets into something that is more tangible. And that's why we're coming back in a couple of months to continue this conversation. But we wanted to get a sense for, is what we're hearing in our work in the communities, especially Melissa's team, who's out there every day, does it align with a lot of what your communities have said to you and what you and your colleagues or friends or family members may have experienced, so that we can better align this? And really, I think the first one and the third one really connect a lot for me, because Melissa's team is being asked to go out and deliver a percentage of rooftop solar, a percentage of batteries. And many times those customers are saying, but I need to lower my bill. And Melissa has to try to move them to rooftop solar or storage. And so we need to align those priorities better so that we can deliver what those customers are really in need of.
Awesome. So Ba has his hand up on this topic, and then I'm gonna go to Megan's question in the chat, and then I'm gonna go to Ox's question in the chat because it looks like Melissa has answered Rachel's. So go ahead, Ba, and then we'll go to Megan. Are you able to come off mute? Okay. Well, while they work on, oh, there he is.
Okay, so can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, yeah. So I was saying aggregating the data will kind of mask, the challenges, right? So if we don't know challenges exist, then we won't be able to address them. At the same time, I also absolutely, I'm in favor of trying to reprioritize programs, right? If there's a program that is like performing better, for sure, like maybe that's where we need to focus and put more energy toward. But if we aggregated the data, then we are just masking the reality. You know what I mean? That was just my thought.
You got it. Megan, you
Yeah,
would like to hear more about demand response. Go ahead.
Yeah, and if we don't have time today, that's totally fine. It's
Well, no,
just
we're being driven by like where you guys want to go. And so I think that's definitely a part of it. I'll keep scrolling in the background so everyone can
Sure.
keep reading the comments. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, it's a program that I've gotten an email about many times, right? And I've just never quite been able to push the yes button. And I know why I haven't done it. I don't know if, I guess two things. I want to know if we have other reasons why, and understanding why other people haven't done it. How much has it been? I'm sure this is probably in the report, and I apologize, I have not had time to dig into it. But I also really want to know, like, what's the benefit of that? I know it's part of the whole, ISP, but like, where does the benefit come from within that for deepest need communities?
And that's for clarity, demand response and it
Yes,
being a
demand
part
response.
of this.
Yeah.
Great. Awesome. Team?
Well, I could at least take on part of that. So our team, with the customer outreach team, we focus a lot on demand response. I think speaking first to how it can like benefit communities in deepest need, um, I always like to think of the analogy you build a building for the couple of times a year that you reach total capacity. So you've got plenty of people that are all going to be in this building just a couple of times a year. And then the rest of the year, it's nowhere near capacity. And so there's a cost to having to build that building to the capacity that it needs for those few times a year. So we all incur that cost because infrastructure, has a high cost that all customers take part in. And so as part of demand response, the way that it works is that if collectively, folks can reduce their energy usage during times of really peak demand, then it reduces the burden on our system and it kind of potentially pauses or delays any need for like more infrastructure to be added. So I think the benefit to named communities in deepest need is that it's helping to keep our bills really affordable by us all collectively taking part in a reduced demand over time. So this program specifically is very voluntary. It's asking communities just to play their part in reducing overall demand of our system so that we can have kind of a true community benefit for all. In regards, Megan's, to like participation at a individual level, there are programs within demand response where customers can receive incentives or benefits for that reduction in power or reduction in kilowatts that they're experiencing. So there's programs that offer rewards, there's incentives. You can be paid per kilowatt hour that you save. So there is some also benefit to named communities or deepest need customers who participate in those programs to see that reduction in their bill or to receive things like rewards, which would be in one of the programs like gift cards. So there's a couple of varying ways to answer that question, but it can have both a bill benefit and then also reducing our bill over time because it's reducing the amount of infrastructure we need to add to the system.
Great.
So
Thank you.
Megan, do you feel like that matches with the intent?
Yeah. Okay. I was just kind of making sure it was the benefits that I thought it was. The first one you're talking about is kind of a step removed. I think that's harder for people to be like, yes, I want to do it for the greater good, right? Yeah, I think people would more so do it for the gift cards or for the, savings on the bills. And yeah, I don't know, maybe it's different for me being on this side of the mountains, living somewhere where it's very hot, right? It's supposed to be 101 degrees on Wednesday. And I still don't know exactly, I guess, what I'm giving up if I were to sign up for that and what that would mean. Like, I know my heat pump. I know when I just had it redone. I know what it can handle. I know how long I can kind of leave it at a certain temperature. For me, I would be scared to give up some of that control, but maybe that's not even what that program does. I don't know. So I'm just telling you from my personal point of view why I've never, uptaken it, why I've never said, yes, I'll participate in that, because it gets scary hot over here and I don't want to lose control. And I don't want to, again, I know my heat pump better than anybody else and like what we need to do to make it livable in the house. So I guess that's just my 2 cents. And sorry, I'm in the dark. It's really smoky over here today, so there's no natural light coming in the windows, and I've got my computer on dark mode. It might die at any moment. So
We can see you.
Okay.
Ray, you came off mute. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, I do. Megan, I just want to make sure that it's clear to you, if you sign up for a demand response program, you do not lose control. So if you allow PSE to control your thermostat, for example, you can, and you decide it is too hot, like me. I grew up in Florida. I moved to Washington because I hate the heat. So
Yep, me too. Not Florida.
I walked in my thermostat and I hit, nope, not right now. And I go
Okay.
back to full control of my thermostat. So
So maybe that's
actually
something that's never come across to me in the emails. And so, yeah, maybe that's good to know for the people who do live in places where it gets, kind of scary hot.
That's a really important feature because everyone reacts differently to temperature, right? People with health concerns, for example, may need it cooler or warmer for that matter in the winter.
Right.
So that's a really important factor in demand response. And that's something we did run into the same thing in the pilot of people asking, well, how does this actually work and what am I getting? And I think it's a
Right.
really, it's simple to use, but it's also actually kind of complex when you think about there are different types of, it can be your thermostat, it can be your hot water heater, it can be
Right.
a number of choices that you make. So really great feedback. Thank you.
Yeah. And again, I think it goes back to, I think a couple other people brought up the idea of trust, right? And
Mhm.
building kind of that trust relationship. And also just, you have to have a smart thermostat, or you have to have these smart, right, appliances to be able to participate. So there's a barrier for sure. And I know there's discounts and things like that for the thermostats.
Yeah, I would just call that. So there's a couple of programs. There's two that don't require any sort of like smart equipment to participate in. And those are the ones that our team typically does a lot of outreach for. And that's that Flex Rewards, where it's just behavioral. So if we send out a notification, we may say, hey, could you turn your thermostat down or a few degrees for the next couple of hours? And it's just a request. And so if the customer isn't able or isn't interested or would like to keep it kind of just the way it is, then there's nothing that they need to do on their part. But they also may decide to use their dishwasher later on in the evening during that period of time, and they're earning rewards during that chunk where they've reduced power. So there is some that doesn't have any additional cost to participate in, and it's all about just behavioral changes when the request comes through.
Great. Thank you.
I wanted to point us towards Aksa's comment in the chat that is taking us a little bit back to the aggregation conversation. But to be honest, it feels like that is the bulk of a lot of these points of feedback on the board. Aksa, would you mind kind of explaining to us what your suggestion for an approach or balance between either aggregation or the different tranches was that you did in the chat?
Sure, yeah. And this is just like a very preliminary thought off the top of my head, nothing fully baked, but I think I'm one of those people who feels that some level of differentiation across the tranches and categories is still important, because I think while different customers and households have different needs that might not necessarily be met by each tranche, or having them, for example, take on rooftop solar when their primary concern is like bill assistance, I still think that some level of differentiation is important. And maybe one way to address that could be like tweaking the target across the tranches. I don't know if that's like even possible, but like if it is, that might be a way to sort of address the concern and like shift some of those targets over to other buckets where there is higher need from customers, but not necessarily like fully doing away with the tranches altogether and just like aggregating benefits across the board, because I do think that some level of differentiation is important. But yeah, just a preliminary idea, and I would be curious to hear from others as well what they think of that, and whether it's even feasible to sort of lower the target levels for one tranche and then increase it or keep it the same for another one.
Brian?
That's a really
Mhm.
I've been staring at this comment for a while, thinking that's a really interesting thought, Oxa, to allow that flexibility, but really to have a more focused approach based on where customers are at or where the programs are at, essentially, I think is what you're saying. Um, in terms of the number itself, could it be different? Probably, maybe. So we'd have to take that back, Oxa. I'm very intrigued by that approach though, because I think it will it will answer a lot of the questions and challenges that we've had thus far. But I hear you also saying keep the tranches. There's some importance in keeping those buckets there. Um, but differentiating the target number so it's different by tranche. Okay. I can thank you for that. That's a really helpful example. Yeah, go ahead, Oxa.
Yeah, and one last thing I'll just add on that. I think, and this is a +1 to Monica's comment in the chat as well. Like, I think it's also important to frame these programs across different tranches to customers in a way where we're seeing reliability, affordability, and clean energy in sort of conjunction and as complementary to each other rather than separate buckets where, a customer should only focus on affordability or only affordability benefits should accrue, but not clean energy. And so, like, I think maybe as an example, like for someone who's hesitant to sign up for like a rooftop solar program because they're more concerned about their monthly bill, just like clarifying that rooftop solar will in the long run also help address that affordability concern. But then also here's a bill assistance program that they're eligible for that can also address that concern in the short term. So not siloing out the approaches and seeing them as separate, but trying to find ways to put them together to benefit customers in the short and in the long term.
I see. Thank you for that. So finding ways to um I don't want to say aggregate, but to give what I hear you saying a short and long term solution, not just you either have solar or you don't, but there's different dimensions, if you will. Okay.
I see hearts for that. Hearts from Christina. Monica, would you like to, Oxa alluded to your comment, but I would love to hear how you'd phrase it if you're able to come off mute.
Yeah, I feel like I've felt a little bit of discomfort as we've been having this conversation. And I think the source of it is that it I in my ideal world, I want all populations, right? Whether they're deepest need or highly impacted communities or named communities to have the freedom of choice to choose any of these programs without the barriers in between. And like in my simplified mind, if deepest need represents, 7% of our customer base, then I would expect to see around 7% all the programs, right? If there's no barriers and everyone's kind of generally interested in the same things, right? And so just like I would love to work on like removing as many of those barriers as possible and that is within PSE's purview. Um, And I'm very much for keeping the tranches. I think that gives us so much, just at least initial information of where there are more significant barriers versus not. So I think that my discomfort is in particular with demand response. We've seen there was a big uptick in interest, especially amongst our kind of like named communities and highly impacted communities, and I can understand why, but that program is about limiting use of energy and not freedom of use of energy. So I want freedom of use for all populations within PSE.
Thanks for that, Monica.
Any reactions, Steve? As we start to come to the last 10 minutes of our time together, public comment will open in 1 minute at 6:50. We will monitor the chat to see if, or the waiting room to see if anyone hops in, and I'll let everyone know. I do want to make sure we're making space, taking space, making space for folks. And so Neith, Piyush, Alex, Dorian, Elizabeth, I know if you guys have ideas or reactions to anything you've heard, I'd welcome you to put that on record verbally. And we do have your comments, but wanting to make space for you. And as you think about what you might want to react to or reflect on from what you've heard, I'm going to do something that's going to group these responses just on the front end into buckets and themes. And I'm very interested to see what it makes those buckets and themes. And so, yeah, any reflections, particularly from folks who maybe have been thinking about stuff for a little bit? See if this works. See here. So our buckets, as you're thinking, benefits aggregation, we got 13 responses about that. Community impact, 5 responses about that. Demand response, 4 responses about that. And program prioritization, 3 responses about that. And then measurement concerns. And so it really does seem like the group is really thinking about this balance, but that could be created and or disrupted with this benefit aggregation conversation and the pros and cons there. So that's been really interesting. Let me go back to the chat here. Yeah, Piyush.
Thanks, Ariam. I'm actually curious about the community benefits aspect of it. Specifically, how would you measure the individual impact, with this community benefit offering?
Yeah, Pish, that is one of the questions. I gave an example earlier where we are taking information from a survey, I should say qualitative information from surveys. And I think someone in the chat raised the point earlier about it's really tough to, I think Megan said, you have to basically survey every individual person, which is not what we're intending to do here. But we do have to think about, is there an impact to a community, let's say a community of customers in the deepest need? If there is, how could we capture that? Because we know there would be a benefit. Now I'm going to use the example of you can call it microgrid in a particular area. We know that there would be a benefit. We would just have to understand and declare and really decide and define what that metric is. How are we going to measure that? So Piyush, to your point, I think it would depend on what that particular community project or program is, and then thinking through, okay, what is that benefit? Is it dollars that are spent in a particular area? Is it what reliability looks like by including a microgrid? There's a lot of talk about climate resilience hub. Is it the amount of emergency backup power that is generated at a hub that we believe we can say that a lot of customers in the deepest need come to during an outage? I think those are the type of different areas we've thought about community benefits, and would be interesting, Piyush, if you have any thoughts on that, or if you have any that sort of spark interest or come to mind for you as well.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. And how possible is it to actually define those metric on a program to program basis? Is there a way to actually define that and collect them and aggregate them across those different programs?
Possibly. I think it depends on the program itself. Each one of them is a little bit different, especially when you think about reliability and the benefit it provides. So I think possibly, but we would have to go back and look at each individual program to really tease out those different types of benefits.
Yeah, thank you, Brian.
Yeah.
Amazing. This has been such a great conversation. We still don't have any public comment, but am looking for any closing thoughts or questions before we go back into our slideshow to do our next steps and everything. But really great conversation. Great buckets of, yeah, go ahead, Troy.
If I could just make an additional comment to Piyush's question. Um, I remember that we serve customers in two ways, generally speaking, right? We serve individual customers at their property. Um, and so they get an individual bill, they get individual power at the meter, all of these. So there's these individual things we can capture. So solar and some of these other things that we've been talking about sort of align with that, whether they have an EV or not, all of that. But then we also serving customers as part of communities. So we have, different um transformers, right, that serve neighborhoods and we have all these community things. And so we can track data about how the customer is experiencing us at the community level. And so I think those are options as we think about how to capture benefits at the community level. The example that has been used just now about, you know, cooling centers or heating centers, right? It's the difference between whether you're capturing every customer's individual experience within their home, or are you also capturing what the community is experiencing? And to Brian's point about capacity, or Melissa's point about capacity, if someone can go to a place where they can be cool when it's hot, other than within their property, that's another way to sort of measure the impact that customer is having. So it's interesting that when this came up recently in Europe, as they were experiencing heating, they realized that they didn't have AC in like public buildings, like hospitals and schools and other places like that. So there's really no place to go unless you could do it at the individual level. So I just wanted to, point that out there, that you're pointing to a good thing, that we can actually capture data in those ways, but we have to be willing to value that community benefit in the same way as we value, or similar to how we value, the individual option.
Awesome. Dorian says that's really helpful, and they're brainstorming. As always, M always invites you and encourages you to send your thoughts, afterthoughts, if you're like, oh, I wish I would have said that. And so we can make sure we get those into the feedback tracker. Elizabeth says she's hoping to see an increase in community solar shares available to make the program more accessible. A tandem outreach strategy could bring more awareness to the program benefits. And so that's excellent comment. I am going to, so how this will work is we will make sure that these comments are in the feedback tracker, but I'll also maybe work with M to see if we can get your Mentimeter responses back to you a little sooner rather than in the report, so that you guys can actually see what everyone said. So I'll work with her on that. Well, I don't have my last slide. So I'm just going to come off, stop sharing, but our next meeting is actually in September. It's summer break. So we don't have any meetings in August, and I hope you use that awesome time to go outside in this beautiful PNW weather with no humidity. I'm also from the East Coast and moved here because I was hot. And so you should definitely enjoy that. Just taking a quick peek here. Our next steering committee meeting is going to be on September 8th, because September 7th is the Labor Day holiday. And so whenever we have a holiday, we move it one day. And then our EAG meeting for September will be on Monday, September 21st. So those are our next upcoming times. Please keep an eye out for your email and resources. Please send us any thoughts or aha moments you have afterwards so that we can make sure they're included. But any closing comments before we close our meeting today?
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you too. Thank you to our presenters. That was an excellent discussion. And I hope you all enjoy summer break, and we will see you in September.
Thanks, everyone.